Somebody's kid rolls up a sleeve at the barbecue. New ink, and everybody leans in. Then they turn to you, tongs in your hand, and ask if you ever got one. You hear yourself say it. Nah, never been my thing. Same 5 words you've been saying since 1994. Nobody questions it. The conversation moves on in 2 seconds. Here's what nobody notices. That sentence arrived fully formed. You never decided it. Somebody handed it to you a long time ago, and you've been repeating it ever since. I'm Daniel Rivera. On this channel, I take the small, automatic things our generation does and trace them back to where they started. If that's useful to you, subscribe. I read the comments, and they decide what I make next. So let's go back to the barbecue, because there's more in that scene than you noticed while it was happening. You're at the grill, which is not an accident either. You're at the grill because at some point in the last 30 years, you became the person who handles the part of the party that has to work. The kid with the fresh ink is somebody's daughter or somebody's nephew, and the tattoo is a set of coordinates or a date or a line from a song you don't know. And when they show it, they're not showing skin. They're showing a preference. They're saying, this is what I love, and I loved it enough to make it permanent. And you can look. Everybody leans in. Somebody's mother makes a face that isn't really disapproval anymore, more like a performance of disapproval that everyone understands is affectionate, and then the question comes to you and out comes the sentence. Never been my thing. Here's the part I want to sit with. You have said that sentence hundreds of times, in break rooms, at parties, in the passenger seat of somebody's car, and you have never once checked it. Not because you're careless, because it works. It closes the topic cleanly, it doesn't invite follow-up, and it costs nothing. It's a very efficient sentence. But an efficient sentence is usually a sentence that was built for a reason. And when I look at where that particular one came from, I don't think it started as taste. I think it started as arithmetic. And I think it was probably correct. Start with the part that has nothing to do with being Latino, because a lot of this is just when we were born. If you were making that decision between, say, 17 and 25, you were making it under conditions that no longer exist. Removal wasn't a thing you could budget for. There was no clean, boring laser appointment on a Tuesday afternoon. A tattoo was closer to a mortgage than a haircut. Whatever you picked at 19 was still going to be on your arm when you were 60, and you would still be explaining it, and the explaining would never end. And the market you were walking into had opinions, not vague ones. There was a page in the employee handbook. You might even be able to picture the font under a heading like professional appearance, and it said something about visible body art. And what it actually meant was, we reserve the right to decide you're not the kind of person we hire. Nobody had to say it out loud. That's the elegance of a handbook. It says the thing without saying the thing, so that later, if you bring it up, everyone can look confused. So you did the math. Permanent mark, no reversal, unknown penalty, applied at unknown times by unknown people over 40 years of employment. And you decided not to spend it. That wasn't fear. That was risk management by somebody who had already figured out that nobody was coming to bail them out. And here's something worth knowing if you've ever felt like the odd one at that barbecue. In that same Pew survey, about a quarter of American adults between 50 and 64 had a tattoo. That's an age bracket, not our generation exactly, and I'm not going to pretend it's cleaner than it is. But roughly 3 out of 4 people standing around at your age made the identical call you made. You are not the holdout, you are the default. Which makes the interesting question not why are you strange? It's why did so many of us independently run the same arithmetic and reach the same answer? That's layer 1, and it applies to a whole generation, all backgrounds. Now here's where it gets more specific, and this next part won't be true for everybody. If it isn't your family, let it go by. But if it is, it's probably the bigger half, because I want to be careful here since there's a lazy version of the story and I'm not going to tell it. The lazy version is, Latino families were strict about tattoos, end of explanation, and the numbers don't support it. In Pew's 2023 survey of American adults, 35% of Hispanic adults reported having at least one tattoo. Slightly more than white adults, not less. There is no shortage of ink in our communities. There never was. So the story isn't that your people didn't get tattoos. The story is what your specific house believed your skin was for. For a lot of families in that period, and especially families that had recently arrived, or recently moved up, or were living somewhere that watched them a little too closely, a mark on your body wasn't read as a preference. It was read as a category, and the categories on offer were not flattering. Gang, prison, that kind of family. It didn't matter what the tattoo actually said, it got translated on arrival by people who weren't asking, which meant your skin was not private property, it was a shared asset. What showed up on your arm showed up on your mother's reputation, on your father's standing at work, on whether the neighbor across the street decided your household was the good kind or the other kind. A whole family can be assessed through one 19-year-old's forearm, and everybody in that house knew it, even if nobody ever said it in a sentence. And there's a second thing sitting underneath it. If you came from people whose bodies were the equipment, hands, back, shoulders, knees, then the body wasn't a surface. It was a tool. You don't decorate a tool, you maintain it, you keep it working, and you try to get it to 65 in one piece. The idea of paying money to put art on the thing you rent out by the hour would have landed strangely in that house. Not offensive, just genuinely confusing, so you absorbed the rule without ever receiving it. Nobody sat you down. You just watched which things drew attention and which things didn't, and you learned the difference. And there's a third layer, and this one is narrower still. It only applies if you were the one they sent in. If you weren't, skip it. But if you were, this is the one that stuck. In a lot of families, one person becomes the representative. Not the oldest necessarily, not the smartest, the one who comes across, right? You were the one who went to the bank counter, the school office, the clinic desk, the landlord's door. And somewhere very early, I'll start earlier than you can date, you figured out that the negotiation started before you opened your mouth. They had already decided something about you by the time you reached the desk. I've watched people carry that job for 30 years without ever calling it a job. And you got good at it in a way that never appeared on any resume. You learned to modulate. You learned which voice to use at the window and which one to use in the car afterward, and how fast to switch between them. You learned to stand a certain distance back from a counter so you read as patient instead of pushy. You learned that if you had the paperwork already out of the envelope and in order before you reached the front, the whole encounter went about 40% better, and you have never once in your life walked up to a desk with papers still in an envelope. Think about the shirt. There was a shirt or a jacket or a specific pair of shoes that lived on a hanger on the back of a door and did not get worn on ordinary days. It came out for appointments, for anything official. And what that hanger taught you without one word of instruction is that your appearance was equipment. It had a function. It was deployed. And the goal of the deployment was always the same. Give them nothing to hold against us. That's not vanity. That's the opposite of vanity. Vanity wants to be looked at. You wanted to be waved through. And now I want to say the honest thing about all of this, because I'm not going to stand here and tell you it was a mistake. It worked. The ability to walk into any room in America and generate 0 questions is a real skill. And it opened real doors. It got applications approved. It got you taken seriously in meetings where somebody was deciding whether to take you seriously. It meant that when you showed up with your mother, or with a cousin who didn't have the English yet, the room read the two of you as competent before anyone said a word. And that made the whole thing go faster and cost less. You were fluent in being unremarkable, and being unremarkable was expensive to learn and worth a lot. Nobody ever tells you when a strategy like that stops paying. That's the thing. There's no letter. Nobody sends a notice saying, the conditions you optimized for have been discontinued. Please adjust. The world just quietly changes the rules and doesn't circle back. Because look around, your nurse has a full sleeve. The person doing your taxes has script down their forearm. In that same Pew survey, 80% of American adults said society had gotten more accepting of tattooed people over the previous 2 decades. And somewhere out there is a CEO with ink to the wrist standing in front of a slide about bringing your whole self to work, addressing a room of people who spent their 20s making sure they brought as little of themselves as possible. The penalty you priced in got repealed. Nobody notified you, and the discipline you built to avoid that penalty is still running right now in the background, and it's been charging interest the whole time. There are 3 costs. They don't arrive together. They arrive in order, and the third one is the reason I'm making this video. The first one you can check in 30 seconds, and I want you to actually do it. Imagine somebody who has never met you walks through your house while you're out, and their only job is to write down one thing you love. Not something you're responsible for. The tools mean you fix things. The good pans mean you cook for people. That's duty. That doesn't count. One thing you love for no reason that benefits nobody. Most people, I've put this to go quiet for a second and then start naming things that belong to somebody else in the household. And then they check the walls, and the walls are neutral. And then they check themselves. The shirt, the shoes, the watch if there is one, the car in the driveway. And every single one of those was chosen so it wouldn't generate a comment. It's not that you don't have taste. You have extremely specific taste. And if I put 2 options in front of you right now, you'd know instantly which one you liked. It's that none of it is declared anywhere, on you or around you. A stranger could study you for an hour and come away with exactly one finding. This person is careful. That's the file. That's everything the file says. That's the observable one. Here's the second, and this one's less comfortable. The habit didn't stay on your skin. It generalized. Somewhere along the way, you stopped making permanent statements of preference anywhere. Not just tattoos. Where to eat, wherever you want. What movie? I don't care, pick. What do you want for your birthday? Nothing, I'm fine. Don't spend money on me. The vacation you'd actually like to take, which you have never once described out loud in full detail to another human being. You've built an entire personality on being easy to accommodate, and it reads as generosity, and part of it genuinely is. But here's the part I'd like you to hold for a second. At some point, you probably started experiencing that as taste, as restraint, as being above it. You don't need to announce yourself. You don't need to advertise, unlike certain people. Maybe you've had that thought at a barbecue. Maybe you had it this summer. That's not taste. That's a survival rule from 1983, wearing a nicer outfit. The room that would have punished you for the tattoo also taught you to look down on the people who took the risk. And that judgment stayed loyal to you long after the room it came from stopped existing. I'm not saying you're a snob. I'm saying somebody handed you a shield and then convinced you it was a trophy. And now the third one, which is the only one that's actually about age. At 25, permanence was frightening in one direction. The danger was regret. 50 more years of looking down at a decision made by somebody who didn't know anything yet. Refusing was obviously the smart play because you had all the time in the world to be wrong in. Somewhere in the last few years, that question turned around, and I don't think anyone announced it. It isn't, will I regret this anymore? At 56, the arithmetic runs the other way. It's, what evidence is there that I was here and that I loved anything in particular? If someone had to say what you cared about, working only from what's visible, your body, your house, your clothes, your car, could they? Or would they get careful, reliable, hard to read? You spent decades keeping the surface quiet for a jury that has since gone home. The handbook got rewritten. The neighbor moved. The people whose judgment you were managing are, in many cases, no longer alive to render it, and the surface stayed quiet anyway because nobody told the habit it could stop. Here's where I land, and it's not the conclusion I expected when I started pulling on this. The blank skin was never an absence of passion. You have never in your life been a person without strong preferences. Ask anybody who's watched you handle a grill or a highway or somebody being careless with your tools. You have opinions about everything. You simply took them off the exterior, and you took them off for a reason that had almost nothing to do with you. You made yourself into a document. Clean, legible, nothing in the margins, nothing that required interpretation. You did it so that the people behind you, your mother at the counter, your kid at the school office, your cousin at the clinic, could be handed across without an interpreter. You were the version of your family that America would process without friction. That was the job. And you did it so well that it became invisible, including to you. That is not coldness. That's not repression, and it's not fear of commitment, whatever a magazine article might tell you. It's one of the most complete acts of care I know of, and it has the worst possible design flaw. It's completely unreadable as care. It looks like having no opinions. It looks like being a little boring. Nobody can thank you for it because from the outside, there's nothing there to see. That's the whole point of it. That was the craft. So I'm not going to tell you to go get a tattoo. That would be ridiculous, and also I'd be doing exactly what the handbook did, just from the other direction. Here's the only thing I'd ask, and it's small. Once, out loud, to one person, finish the sentence. If I'd gotten one, it would have been... That's it. You don't need to mean it. You don't need to price it out or find a shop. You just need to hear yourself state a preference with nothing at stake and nobody grading it. And if the honest answer is nothing, I truly don't want one. I like my arms the way they are. Good. That's a real answer, and it might have been the right call all along. I'd only ask that it be today's answer, from the adult who's actually sitting there, and not one you inherited from a room that stopped existing 20 years ago. There's a difference between a decision and a rule you never reopened. You're allowed to keep the rule. Just check whose it is. Now I want the story, because these comments are where the next video comes from. Not what you think about tattoos, a scene. The first time somebody asked you and that automatic sentence came out. How old were you? Where were you standing? And what happened in the 10 seconds right before the question? Was there a shift going on? Was somebody from your family in the room? Was it a job interview or the back of a car or a kitchen? And if you can't find a first time, tell me that instead, because that's the more interesting answer. It means the rule got installed early enough that it never had a first day. And there's one more of these, and it's the same mechanism wearing different clothes. Go look at the hallway wall in your house. The one with the photos. Count how many of them are you. Not you standing at the edge of somebody else's milestone, but you as the subject, framed on purpose because somebody wanted to look at you. That's the next thing we need to talk about, and it's the same discipline running in a different room. But for now, go back to the barbecue. Same grill, same kid, still holding out that forearm, still lit up about it. Somebody's mother still making the face, and in about 40 seconds, somebody is going to turn to you and ask if you ever got one, and you already know exactly which 5 words are going to come out. Let them. It's a good sentence. It served you for 30 years, and it kept a lot of people safe. Just know this time where it came from, and know that the room it was built for isn't standing anymore, and that you are the only person left who can decide whether it still gets a vote.